and I immediately notice a debris field. And so all my training kicks in, and I'm thinking, explosion, get out. And that is the beautiful thing about what we do as officers, as first responders, is our training is at such a level that it's like we know immediately what to do. There's no thinking. It's just a switch. And you could feel them when they hit the ground. That's how close we were. And, at that time, I didn't know that one of them had landed on a firefighter, killed him. It's just not something that anybody should see. I wasn't 100%. An agent that's not 100%, well, stuff can happen. And it's one thing when you're an investigator and that's all you do. It is a whole nother ballgame when you are responsible for somebody's life. I drag myself into the bathroom and look in the mirror, and I do not recognize my own reflection staring back at me. That is scary. Right then, I was done. Right there, I made the decision, no, I'm not starting a new year the way I just lived this one. I'm out. I went to the kitchen, grabbed the remaining bottles of alcohol, went in my basement, got my gun, sat on the floor. I'm like, this is it.
You're listening to the ATO Bridging the Divide podcast, brought to you by the Assist the Officer Foundation.
Since 1999, the ATO has given assistance to the first responder community, and now we want to give them a platform to hear their incredible stories.
We also want to hear the stories of the many people that support us.
Our community is small, but it is strong.
We have differences. We don't always agree, and we all make mistakes.
But together we can grow, we can heal.
And we can learn from those mistakes.
And together we can bridge the divide.
Survival is the celebration of choosing life over death. We know we're going to die. We all die. But survival is saying, perhaps not today. In that sense, survivors don't defeat death. They come to terms with it. Lawrence Gonzalez. Welcome back, ATO family. Today we're sitting down with someone who has a lineage of survival. Going back to 1912, aboard the Titanic, some of her family members survived this. Or on August 8th, 1942, when the USS Elliott sank into the Pacific Ocean, there was a young man that survived this attack. He grew up to be one of the most successful dentists in Virginia. He is the grandfather of today's survivor. Today's guest will take us back to September of 2001. It's hard to believe this was over 20 years ago. This guest will take us on a journey from how her morning started and when she arrived at work at the World Trade Center at 8:43 a.m. And her biggest concern was being late for work. The account you're about to hear is from a survivor from the greatest terrorist attack in U.S. history. I mentioned her arriving at the World Trade Center at 8:43. This time is important as at 8:46 a.m., Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower. Samantha Horwitz, we are ready for your story. Samantha, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
I want to introduce some guest co-hosts. Kent's not a guest. He's always here. Kent Wolverton's here, and Vice Sergeant Roy Marino. He's also the founder of the Brotherhood of the Fallen chapter here in Dallas in 2017. Roy, say hello.
Thank you for having us.
Oh yeah, you and I, we've known each other forever, but we've talked recently about you've been listening to the podcast, and I appreciate your support and look forward to working more with you in the future on some projects.
Yeah, I'll be honored. I've listened to every episode. Every time I listen to an episode, I talk to Ken and Joe, and very therapeutic, and I listen to every single one of them.
Thank you. That's by design. That's what it was for, and I appreciate it. Yeah, I get people all the time that stop me, and I have no idea who actually is listening, and then somebody will stop me in the hall and have an idea for an episode. I'm like, oh, I didn't even know you were checking this out. So, your story it's going to have you have one of the most critical of incidents for the country and for the world, and we're going to get into that. But I want to build up to it. I want the listener to get to know you and your path to the Secret Service, and then also we're going to get to September 11th, 2001, and then talk about where you're at now. But I want to start off, just tell the listener where you grew up, tell a little bit about your childhood.
Yeah, wow. Well, I grew up in Montgomery County, Maryland, and typical household in the burbs, about 15 miles outside of DC, and grew up playing sports, basketball, soccer, moved into softball, but went to sports camp. So you name it, super involved, loved the challenge of athletics and kind of the way it challenged me as a kiddo. I think unless you play football in Texas now or baseball, it's whatever the big sports are. It's has something to be desired. It's very different now.
What did you play?
I played soccer.
Okay.
Basketball, softball, lacrosse. Gosh, just
all the above.
Well, much. If you want to start from the very beginning, kickball.
Kickball, yeah.
that was the thing.
My daughter plays soccer. She's actually pretty good. She's plays a good sweeper and forward. Yeah, I think that sports, it brings out it introduces you to some failure, which you can learn from. I think you need to have that in your life to learn from and grow from and become more resilient to failure and know how to deal with it. But it just also it helps cultivate a competitive competitive nature. You're always going to in some way compete for something, even in the professional world.
Yeah, and I started playing before there were girls teams. So yeah, that's how old I am. So yeah, it was the best experience. I think when we look at women's sports now, and I know that's not what the podcast is about, but it's been in politics. Without having women's sports, this country loses a lot. And so it's just been nuts watching everything that's going on, and it helped me compete at a different level, starting with the guys, to first see that I could, and then after that, working in the jobs that I chose to work in, which are dominated by men, and whether it was my first management position in a sports store to the Secret Service, and It helped me get along, and it was actually ability to bridge where it wasn't like, oh, you're a guy, oh, you're a girl. There was none of that. It was just like you're part of a group.
So you mentioned the Secret Service. When did you realize you wanted to get into that profession and law enforcement and just the federal side?
Oh, really early on. Every guy in my family served this great country in our armed forces. And so when I took the ASVAB in high school and the recruiters started calling, I thought it was my time, gonna follow in Dad's footsteps and everybody. And my mom said, absolutely not. So I went the next best thing, which was quasi-military, in law enforcement, federal law enforcement. And at first, I didn't know what path I was going to take. I knew that service was in my blood from, if anybody is listening, remembers the TV show Emergency.
Yeah.
And then we had chips and all that. It was, but it was really having that heart for service that captured me early. And so I was like, oh, be a police officer. And then through high school and ultimately in college, I was introduced to different law enforcement agencies by doing different internships. And Prince George's County, Maryland, I went to school and graduated from University of Maryland College Park. Got to do an internship in the Prince George's County State's Attorney's Office, where I met some federal agents from FBI, from DEA, and I was handling evidence for a major trial.
Okay.
And this drug trial was the biggest at that time in Prince George's County in terms of moving cocaine. And so here I am, I'm in college, and it's like, oh, go pick up this evidence. Oh, hey, we need you to transcribe, and sitting at hours and hours and listening to the tapes, because we had an undercover inside. And I was like, whoa. And then talking to the different agents, I was like, well, maybe I want to go federal. So I talked to my dad, who served our government both in the military and in the Department of Energy, and he started talking about different agencies that he was involved with at DOE. And I was like, well, I'm just going to keep my options open. He said, well, one thing I want you to consider is going to law school. I said, what? And he's like, no, you have been doing this internship. Look at law school. Now, there were, lawyers were on every street corner back then, and they are even more now.
Yeah, still are.
Yeah. And so I went to and graduated law school, Howard University School of Law, and I like to say I use my powers for good, not evil, and ended up kind of bouncing around, because what you learn about the feds, and what I learned real quick, is they want some life experience. Right. So I applied to some, looking at local PDs. I was like, should I put my application in? Yeah, I'll put my application in. And in the meantime, I got a pamphlet my dad brought home. He's like, hey, have you ever heard of the Secret Service? And I was like, well, of course. They're the people that protect the president. And he said, well, they do more than that. They do investigations. And I was like, let me look at this. And so I said, well, I'm going to do this. The FBI was my first choice, and no offense to any FBI folks out there, but I'm glad I did not end up with the FBI. We worked together a couple of times in different investigations, but I ultimately fell in love with the protective details in the Secret Service. So the FBI doesn't provide that. And it was after law school, graduated, had my application in, and it took a while to hear back. And these were the days where you're filling out applications, some online, but mostly by hand. So it was like, I think it was 25-page application. And it was great because my dad could take it in and put it in the right hands. And also I had some personal recommendations from some folks that had worked at different levels, including the White House. So that was
that helps.
Preferable.
Yeah.
It does help. Mm-hmm. And got the call that, hey, you're going through next steps. And I'll never forget, it was called the Treasury Enforcement Exam, because Secret Service used to be under the Treasury Department. A little bit of history.
Yeah.
And Abraham Lincoln created it to combat counterfeit way back when. Imagine if he had created us to protect the president, right?
It was created at really short amount of time before he was assassinated. So it had not even been really defined yet.
Right.
So interesting, yeah.
Yeah. So, it was a test that you go down to HQ down in DC, and I remember I'm terrible at math still to this day.
No,
I was like,
too.
I went to law school. I suck at math. and I had to get a tutor to make sure I could do fine in this math. Now, granted, my high school math teachers, they taught math. I don't know what they're teaching now. I can't even help my son. I feel terrible. But I got a tutor. I got through the math section. They called, went on to the process. The process ultimately completed itself with the wonderful polygraph, where everybody feels like they are a criminal and you're never going to get hired.
Yeah, I felt that here.
Yeah. I literally came home and said, I think I failed the polygraph. My mom was like, what? Yeah. And they're doing their job, right?
Well, you want that. Yeah, you want that too.
And part of it is, seeing how far they can mess with your head. And so got the call, started with special agent in training. So it's a 2-part, really 3-part, where you go to SAITC first, see if you can keep up with physical demands and stuff like that. Because I was an athlete my whole life, not a problem. But it really made me realize, hey, I want to compete even more, because it's just in my blood also to be competitive. And so, doing 4 pull-ups, that wasn't okay when, 10 had to be the goal.
Right.
So they give you a baseline of where you are, and then at FLETC, Federal Law Enforcement Training Center down in Glencoe, Georgia, that's where you really work on the things that they had planned out. So that was great. You're going into the next phase with a plan. And went through FLETC in the summer. It's very hot. First introduction to fire ants. Yeah.
And now you see them everywhere here in Texas.
Yes. Well, this was before I moved to Texas. But so, yeah, fire ants for real.
Yeah.
And yeah, FLETC was a wonderful experience, because we were there with all the other trainees in the different federal law enforcement agencies.
And how long did that training go?
At that time, it was 12 weeks.
Wow. Okay.
So the timing, I think, is a little bit different now that's under Homeland Security. And then come back. That's where I learned to shoot. So, there was no, even though my dad and all the guys were in the military, we didn't have guns in the house. It was like, no, there will never be guns. I remember my dad bringing home a revolver, my mom freaking out. She was like, you have to hide that. And I was like, Mom, it's a revolver.
Yeah.
She's like, how do you know what that is? I'm like, I watch TV.
Watch Bugs Bunny. He has one.
Well, that was Elmer Fudd with
the shotgun.
with the rifle or shotgun, yeah. And so I had no firearms experience in my background at all. So these guys at FLETC, top notch. I'll never forget, everybody started. Didn't matter if you had prior law enforcement experience. And we were a class that was considered older. So the median age was 28 for our class. And we had class 189 and 190 combined together. So there was me and 2 other women in the classroom. When we did our stuff separately, I was the only female in my class. And so went through firearms, and they're like, here's a 357 and, real long barrel. Yeah. And I learned how to shoot, and I was like, okay, I can do this, and this is good. And it is get back to Beltsville, which is now you're in the Secret Service Training Academy. So outside of D.C. in Maryland, and the 357 is nothing like the SIG P229 357. Just
right.
Yeah. So I was like, oh my God, what just happened? Did I totally regress? I totally sucked. And I can laugh about it now because I teach firearms, and mostly to women, kind of build up courage, empowerment, and shoot, we're living in a pretty crazy time right now.
Yes.
So I like people to feel comfortable around firearms, and still keep in touch with my firearms instructor from Beltsville. So he's pretty proud of me, and I thank him all the time for giving me the skills and abilities.
What's his name?
His name's Bill.
Shout out, Bill.
Yeah, shout out to Bill. And yeah, he's still in, so I'm not gonna say his last name.
Okay.
But yeah, it was pretty cool.
Whenever you got into, what were some of your goals whenever you got into the Secret Service? You said whatever about the protective aspect of it drew you in? What were some of the goals when once you got in and got through the training and become official? What did you want to get into?
Well, the first thing was we had to pick where we wanted to be assigned. So if you're assigned outside of DC, you are assigned to a protective squad. If you get the Washington field office, you're doing protection. What they didn't mention was if you're going to New York, that's where I ended up, New York field office, so the second largest field office, the UN. So
wow.
You're doing protection. I handled, I had one big case a year, and it's a juggling act. So you learn how to seriously compartmentalize and prioritize your time, because you had to keep up with quarterly training. You had to keep up with anything going in court, meeting with the DAs. We served our own search warrants. It wasn't like we called the NYPD and said, hey, this is the case. Nope, from start to finish, we were it. So build your teams, build your plan, the whole thing. That was great. But like I said, I fell in love with the protective aspect of the job, got to work with some very high-powered world leaders. For better or worse, they were not assassinated on U.S. soil. I'm just saying, but
right.
Prime Minister of Lebanon, Hariri, the former, he great detail. But soon after arriving back in his own country, he was assassinated. And then we had some world leaders from the different African nations. War crimes, and some of them were brought up on war crimes. Nothing happened when I was assigned with them in New York and on the U.S. soil.
What year was that when we got assigned to New York?
Oh gosh, it was 2000
okay.
End of 99, 2000.
Okay, and that was your first assignment right out of that's where you got sent right out of training?
Yeah.
Okay. 2000. I mentioned before we're going to we're going to talk about your book later, but I want to get into the details of the events. I want to get into September 11, 2001. A lot of young officers right now. It seems like it's been so long that I think a lot of people have forgotten the horrors of that day and everything that happened and how the country really felt we were under attack, and we weren't sure how it was gonna. Any of us are going to move forward. I was working out at Southeast and on Fourth Watch, which is a combination of deep nights, and we were worried that there was going to be more attacks later that week, and I'm sure everybody was. So can you kind of walk us through your day and morning, or your morning and day, and just how everything unfolded? I read your book, so I kind of have stalked you that way, but. I just kind of want you to tell the listener, bring them back to September 11, 2001, and talk about how your day went.
Yeah, it was just like any other day. I mean, I do remember that it was a beautiful sunny day. It was quite warm for that time. In New York City, we started getting a little bit chilly, and I was preparing to go to we called it a police meeting, because we were preparing for the UN's 50th World Summit. Super big deal. And so what we did is we bring in FDNY, NYPD as supporting agencies, because the Secret Service is still small. It's a little bigger now under DHS, but back then, I mean, we needed all hands on deck, and we could never do our job in the city without NYPD and the fire department, and those guys are just amazing. And the plan was that we were having this meeting first thing, go over specifics, assignments, and so I'm getting ready to head out the door kind of earlier than what your usual rush hour is, and I was living in New Jersey. So I had to go over one of the bridges to end up on the island of Manhattan. And I was dead stopped on a bridge. Now, there should not have been traffic at this hour. And I'm looking at the clock, and you all know in law enforcement, if you are on time, you are late.
Right.
And, this is a big police meeting. And I'm like, under my breath every curse word. I'm like, what do I do? Come on, traffic. It's not like you can go around. There's no shoulders. You're on a bridge. And the traffic clears, but I'm on my BlackBerry. Again, dating myself. So we had the first generation BlackBerry. Super cool. And I'm letting my supervisor know, hey, I'm going to be hopefully right on time, but this situation. Okay, get here when you can. So I make it through the Holland Tunnel into World Trade Center 1, and we parked in our secured parking area under 1. Get out, run to the elevator, and the elevator car door opens, and I remember it is like packed with people, and I'm like, this is weird. It's maybe one or two on any given day, or me by myself, and we start the ascent up to the lobby level, and all of a sudden the elevator car starts shaking, the lights start flickering, and I'm thinking, oh, now I'm getting stuck in an elevator. I'm never gonna live this down, because my supervisor's like, what? And the weird thing was, the day before, I had noticed that they had been working on the elevator. So that's just where my mind immediately went.
It broke down.
Okay, yeah, it broke down. And hopefully it won't be too bad. And because we're underground, I'll be able to, text my supervisor. But then it was as if, and I describe in the book, like a hand grabs onto the top of our elevator car, and we start ascending rapidly, not normal. And then we stop. The elevator car stops, the doors fly open, and it is so abrupt that we're bouncing under the tension of the wires. And I immediately notice a debris field. And so all my training kicks in, and I'm thinking, explosion, get out. And that is the beautiful thing about what we do as officers, as first responders, is our training is at such a level that it's like we know immediately what to do. There's no thinking. It's just a switch.
It's instinct and a reaction.
Yeah. Exactly. And there's no thinking. You just do, and you go into action. And that's exactly what I did, because people that aren't trained, they do interesting things, like try to get back on elevators, turn around in circles, walk back and forth, talking to themselves. It was interesting, to say the least.
What kind of debris field? You felt like the intense heat was the heat. Yeah.
So yeah, when those doors flew open, we went to step out because it's like we were just getting stuck. You want to get out. It was just this hottest ball of dust-filled air, and it just kind of blew into your face, and you could feel it. And then there was just papers flying everywhere.
Do you know what floor you were on at the time?
Yeah, we had stopped at the lobby level of 1. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, because you were at the basement and you came up to 1. Okay. So whenever people were doing chaos, mass chaos, from the other people, and what happened? And you exited off, and what did you do then?
Oh, I grabbed the people that were trying to get back into the elevator, and we went up an escalator. And I went out an exit I had never used before to kind of set the scene. At that lobby level, that's where people could get their morning papers. You could get, bagels or pastries, coffee, and have meetings. And that connected you. You could walk to the different towers, because there's 7 buildings in the World Trade Center complex. They were. And so I ended up in an escalator in World Trade Center 6, which was the old post office. And then I went out an exit door I had never used before. My gut just said, go that way. And glad I did, because 6 was one of the earliest buildings to be constructed, and it provided an overhang. So you walk out the doors and you're still covered by the building. So think of it as like 2 squares. One smaller is the lobby, and then a larger one sitting on top of it. and I'm with the people that I grabbed, and we just are stopped dead in our tracks, taking in everything that's going on around us, which is debris falling all over the place, pieces of metal, continued dust filling the air, papers flying, concrete chunks coming down, pieces of people. This was not something we were trained for, but we're in chaos, right? So my brain said, get to 7, get to your building. So I grabbed these people. We went around, stayed very close to the building. They were letting out a childcare facility. They were evacuating 6, and got to the far corner of 6 where I could look across and see the lobby level of my building. We were connected by a pedestrian bridge. So you have the World Trade Center complex 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in one giant square plaza, and then you take a pedestrian bridge across Vesey Street, and that led you into the lobby level of 7. And get to that corner, and I could see my supervisor. She was in the lobby as some of my squad mates, and she was motioning to me like, Sam, come on, run. She had, and my squad mates had, a completely different perspective, if you will, than I did, because I had 6, was at my back, and they could see not everything, but they could see the debris because the towers are so tall. Your line of sight was cut off, and I told the one woman that was with me. She went with the kids when they were coming out of the daycare. And so I had another woman with me, and I told her, I said, we're going over there. And as soon as I took off running, she broke away from me, went down a flight of steps. I don't know what happened to her, but I made it into my building. And once in the lobby, my supervisor's like, oh my God, are you okay? And I'm just like, what is going on? And, we're all standing there, and nobody has any word, and then just trickle down. Took time, because in the lobby there's no TVs. We're not hearing any of the scuttle about, was it a helicopter, was it a small plane, what was going on. To a trained eye, it's like, okay, we have something that is blown out, so it's some sort of explosion.
Do you think, because it had been attacked in 93, correct? Mm-hmm. Is that what you thought, that it was another bomb inside?
Well, that's where all our heads at, because this police meeting that was to happen that day didn't happen. But a few days before, we had been briefed again on the bombing of 93.
Yeah.
And so that's where our heads went. And we're in our building, and that's when Tower 2 gets hit. And we watched the glass. 7 was all glass on the front, bow in and pop back out. It held, didn't break. And we're just like, what is going on? And we just thought we would eventually, go investigate what this was.
I've seen, everybody's seen the videos of that. I can't imagine how loud that explosion was from your perspective and where you were and your position inside that building. Was it like, just a tornado and times 1,000? You described the sound and...
there were so many sounds, and from what I've been told, my therapist and since then, that as you go through the healing process and you get better, that things kind of get jumbled, and so it's just like sound. There were just sounds. It was when the towers came down, that I clearly remember, like a low grumbling, growling sound. That's how I describe it in the book as well. The impact and explosion of Tower 2 getting hit was it was almost like an earthquake-ish. You could feel it go through your body, and this this just very low bass boom.
After the second tower was hit, did y'all just have a plan? We need to get the hell out of this.
Eventually.
Yeah. Okay.
I was so. You know how we've all seen videos of people being crushed to death, and your listeners are probably like, "What is she? Where is she going with this?" I had taken in so much dust, I started to cough, and so we had a little cafe in our lobby, and I went there to get a drink. And as I'm standing, I pay for my drink. I open it, and I start drinking. That's when Tower 2 gets hit, and I watch the wave of people come right to me, and I'm pinned up against the counter at the register, and I just am like, stop, and make my way back out. And a decision was made. Hey, we need to evacuate. We're the third tallest building in the World Trade Center complex. We're next. It was not a public building besides Secret Service, field office being in there. Then Mayor Giuliani's Office of Emergency Management was in there. And so it wasn't like, hey, come on down and come into our building and there's no restaurants or anything like that.
Right. So when y'all made a decision to get out of the building, can you kind of walk us through that, how that went?
Yeah, there was an escalator on the far side of our building, and so we all filed in there, and then you had to look really hard for this door because, like I said, it was not open to the public. And behind this exit door, which had like a stripe that was like a mirrored, it was decorative on the outside, so that's why I said you had to know that there was a door there. Went down the hallway. Now when we made arrests, the warrants and the cases that we handled, we would bring folks into the parking garage, not the parking garage, sorry, the loading dock, close the doors, and then we would lead them through this loading dock into our interrogation rooms. So now we're taking the public down the hallways where our rooms are, because anybody that was in there was like, we're getting out. Didn't matter if you worked there or not. We were getting out, and you go down this long corridor, and the exit door takes you out next to what was the Verizon building, which then you walk to West Side Highway.
At what point did you realize that it was a plane, not just a regular explosion?
Oh, not for a little while yet.
And whenever you did realize that it was a plane, did it change the whole mentality behind it?
Yeah, when we found out that it was a plane, it was from another agent who happened to be coming down West Side Highway in his G-Ride. He had his regular radio on, not his police radio. And we heard that the Pentagon got hit. So we were hearing this, and we're like, he told us, we're like, planes, the brain doesn't register. It's like, planes don't fly into buildings. Planes surely don't fly into the Twin Towers because they're the largest thing, and you should be able to see them, right? And so when we heard that the Pentagon got attacked, it was like you had to like shake yourself into some sort of something that made sense. You just had to grab onto something. And so I look back up at the towers, and I could see Tower 1 where we were from West Side Highway. You could see Tower 1 clear as day. Tower 2, the smoke trail behind it. And we're like, okay, maybe that's the shape of like the wing if it went in there. So your mind starts wrapping, your head starts making pictures of what you're hearing from somebody and then through the radio. And it was like, okay. And then we had to do it all over again. We were watching the people jumping because, when you're in a tall building, you take the elevator down, you don't jump.
So I read your book. You start seeing people fall. We've seen the videos, and you described one in your book, the jumper, and that was one of the images that really haunted you. That was once you were outside, or in just before they fell, obviously, and you were watching this. Can you kind of describe that scene?
Yeah, make no mistake, they were in a position where it was burn to death or jump, not fall. And the, to in my mind, I can only imagine that they rationalize, hey, if I jump, I can somehow get to the other walkway, which connected the financial towers. And, I don't know. We're watching these people, and it's like it's not real. There have been hoaxes in the past in New York City where people would throw the mannequins off. And so when we saw the first, and I say we because I was with my squad mates, it was like, was that? No. Like it couldn't have been a person. And then the next, and then the next, and then after 10, stop counting. And you could feel them when they hit the ground. That's how close we were. And, at that time, I didn't know that one of them had landed on a firefighter, killed him. And it's just not something that anybody should see.
No. Yeah, I remember those hoaxes, and watching it on the news and the live shots was jarring enough. I can't imagine actually experiencing that and seeing that, along with everything else around you that was going on, with all the sounds and the smells and the smell of burning concrete.
Yeah.
Which is still
fire, burning concrete. Oh yeah.
So whenever y'all started getting away from the buildings, how did that look?
Like I said before, one of the sounds was this low grumbling, growling sound, and I had noticed that this was something that was getting louder. It was so out of place that it stood out to me. And Tower 2 comes down first, and we run into the closest building that had open doors, which was a school. And as you might imagine, we got some attention because here's all of us, and some of us, I had my suit on because obviously I came right from my car. I also had like a gym bag, and so some of us had suits on. Some of the agents only had jackets. Some of them had gym clothes on. So some of us had our guns. Some of us didn't. We were all like just a giant cluster of humanity swarming into this school. The principal and the folks from the front desk came out to be like, whoa, who are you? And we told them what happened. Tower 2 collapsed, and we were like, well, we have to go back out because we're trained to save people. There was one problem, that dust. And you couldn't go out without having your mouth and your nose covered. It was impossible to breathe. And so the guys, were resourceful, just started ripping up their shirts, their dress shirts. So that now they have dress pants on. Some of them, again, had their guns, and now they just have their white T-shirts, and start fashioning bandanas. And we're like, well, if we can't all go because somebody's got to be here if we're going to carry victims out. Well, somebody's got to be here to accept them. How does that scene want to look? And then we got to get ambulances, stuff that we're trained to do, that organize, that go into every, protectee detail movement, whether it's a pre-site plan or whatever you needed for a detail. And so myself and 2 other agents stayed behind at the school, worked with the school nurses, got all the equipment out that you could imagine that you need for first aid, got the gym mats out on the gym floor, and the plan was, let's bring people to the school, we'll get them triaged, get them on an ambulance. Easy peasy, right?
You're right. Yeah, I remember the flood of of debris and smoke that just, I mean, you couldn't see. I mean, it was just, it flooded the streets. So how far away was the school at that point when the building started collapsing?
Like 2.5 blocks, maybe 3 blocks. Okay. Yeah.
Was there a point where you wanted to evacuate the school and you were a part of that?
Yeah. So in the midst of preparing to have people come, which they didn't.
It was too close. It was.
There was no, when the towers came down. I mean, if you were there, you're not with us anymore. Right. So, about some time had gone by, and the principal got called to. He was told to evacuate, so he came to get us. And of course, we're like, all right, well, what do you need? And we did not know that the school that we ran into was for developmentally delayed children. So you had wheelchairs, walkers, anything that they needed for assistance. But they knew how to do evac, and they were orderly. The kids did great. And it was myself, the 2 agents that I was with, the principal, and a student who is towered over me and he was about 6'1", 6'2", and he had his aide with him, and we're the last ones out. And we're walking out their side door, and the plan was to walk to West Side Highway and just keep going north. Okay, it's simple. Get away from the school, keep going north. And the student stopped walking. I mean, we had scared him to death. We didn't appreciate the fact that, yes, this is an evacuation, but other than his home, the school was his safe place, and he doesn't know us. He knows his aide, and she's trying everything that she can to kind of coax him because it's an emergency situation, walk a little bit faster. He's like, screw you guys, and just stops. And we're trying everything that we know how. Here we are, investigators. We know, kind of the art of persuasion. We can't get this kid to walk. And the aide, she's like, oh, trying to be and we're like, we need to go now.
Yeah. You had to go to plan B. So what was plan B? What did y'all end up doing with the student?
That low grumbling, growling sound that I got extremely loud, and we looked, and Tower 1's coming down. We scooped him up, and we start running as fast as we can up West Side Highway, and every muscle in my body felt like it was on fire. But that dust cloud that you just spoke about, that everybody remembers seeing on the news, it was coming up for us really fast, and we're like, no, we have to outrun this. And we just did. It was that determination. Again, I go, my brain goes back to sports training. Pour everything you have in your physical body right at this moment and get this kid, and you and your 2 agents that are friends. We're family, right? We need to go. And we did. We slowed down. We looked back. The dust was starting to settle. And it was a scene out of The Walking Dead. I mean, the dust comes down and people are walking out. And some of them got hit. So there's blood coming from mostly from the head. And I remember some like on legs, and some had like ripped clothes. And so we're just like, what do we do? And we go to turn around to keep walking north, and an ambulance just appears. And 2 firefighter paramedics jump out, and in New York, call them the bus. They jump out and they come running. They see we have somebody, and they immediately jump into action. One of them takes the leg that I have. The other one, the agent who had the student scooped up underneath his arms. I'm not going to say his name just to protect his identity. And he jumps in and helps him. with the student, and then they load him onto the stretcher, and he and the aide get whisked off to the hospital, and we're standing there like, what now? And then our pagers go off. Oh yeah, I just dated myself again. A pager. You know that thing that beeps at you?
I'm familiar with those.
There you go. So the pager was scrolling text. All NYFO agents meet at Pier 63. So that meant that somebody was still in our building, inside, sending these texts from what, you call our command ops. And we called it the duty desk. It was like, okay, somebody's still there. Well, we're just going to follow what the text says, because we've already walked further than you would in New York City. And any given day, that's what cabs are for. And we get to Pier 63, and everything got so jumbled. But some of our supervisors were there. Some of the people, I was like, wait, you were down there, and now you're up here. And they had arranged for the U.S. Park Police to ferry us on their small boats, ferry us across the Hudson to New Jersey. New Jersey field office agents were waiting with their G-rides to take us home. Coordination, planning, this is what we're good at, right? And for those of us who were either in the dust cloud, got caught up, or like us, running from it and dealing with what we had just been through, it was good to see the field office folks that were there.
So how does a day like that actually end? I mean, you say they basically call you over and say they're going to shuttle you across the water
the Hudson,
there,
yeah.
and then you go home and decide what's for dinner. Like that seems really, really odd.
Yeah, it was for me, it was, oh crap, I have no keys to get into my apartment, because, I left a lot of the stuff in my G-Ride, and it was, you're going home, and I was going back to an empty apartment. It was around 5:30 when I got there. Because I didn't have my keys, I went to one of my squad mates who lived very close to me, and he and his wife let me get a hold of my landlord to call to say, hey, I'm locked out. Can you come meet me? And his first thing was, oh my God, Sam, because he knew what I did. And so he met me there and got me in the apartment, gave me the keys, and I don't even have keys to my POV because they were on the same keychain. So I'm like, it was all planning. It's like, what do I need to do next? So some running on pure adrenaline, and I'm pacing. I'm walking around my apartment, still in the same clothes, all covered in dust, and my phone rings. And at this time, the phone lines were down. I had access out. We had, besides the BlackBerry, we had government with our phones, not smartphones. And for whatever reason, my phone worked. So I was able to, I connected with my family first, and then I was able to give my phone to people that were up from DC taking part in, this UN thing. And they were able to let their spouses know that they were okay. And so the phone rings, and it's my best friend that I grew up with in high school. We met in junior high. And again, everybody was like, oh my God, Sam. So Scott, he's like, oh my God, Sam, I can't believe I'm talking to you. Thank God. Your building just came down. I'm like, no. I worked in 7, we're okay. Everybody's out. He's like, yeah, 7 World Trade Center, right? I said, yeah, your building just came down. Go to the TV. I'm like, what? I go to the TV, turn it on, and sure enough, I'm watching 7 come down, and I'm thinking, oh my God, the duty desk, the text, I was like, oh, geez. And it kind of put me into this, well, now what?
So go ahead.
Yeah, now what?
That's the next question is what do you do the next day? Because I've worked with the Secret Service and several federal agencies before, and Secret Service is probably top notch as far as logistics. Like you said, we've got plans, we've got procedures for everything we're supposed to be doing. It's very well organized. But now you're talking about our office is wrecked. If there's anything left, it's a crime scene at this point. You guys don't have access to hardly anything that you typically would.
Yep.
So what is the next day like?
Well, it was finding everybody that didn't report in. So it was stay. Those of us that had our pagers, like I said, depending on where we were, we either had equipment, we didn't. So I got called from my supervisor, and she was asking me if I remember seeing one of my squad mates. And I said, yes, I remember seeing her. She was standing right next to me as we were watching the people jump. And then I have no idea where she went. And there were other people that were on the other side of Manhattan, on the other side of the island, or doing other assignments somewhere else. So they weren't there. So it was trying to figure out where everybody was. And hey, stay close to your phone. Don't if you need to go out or whatever, just let us know, kind of thing. Then the next call came in. Hey, we're gonna have a debrief, and as okay, and here's what you need to know. And it's gonna be at the airport, and just show up. I can't remember what time it was that we needed to be there in the morning. And hey, you need to take care of some business before you get there. Make sure that you go and get a chest x-ray. Here's some providers and stuff like that. I'm like, what the fuck? Sorry.
No, you're.
Are we allowed to?
You can say whatever you want. Yeah.
And my brain, I'm like, what the fuck? It was business as usual. We had to do business as usual because that was what was keeping us in a forward momentum.
Just a sense of normalcy.
Right. We were not ready to unpackage yet. It took me hours just to get in the shower that night. And I had to wait for my boyfriend, who's now my husband, and to drive up from Maryland, because I couldn't piece anything together of why I'd go in my bathroom. I closed my bathroom door and I would just start sweating. My heart felt like it was going to jump out of my chest. And if I was out of the bathroom in open space, all of those kind of things would dissipate. I never put two and two together. Nobody talked about this in training. It was like, just go kick ass. I'm the only female, and my partner in controlled tactics was 6'1", and it was like, hey, let's go watch Sam get thrown around a mat room, right? So, hey, you deal with the bruises, you deal with the bumps, you deal with getting knocked around, and you keep soldiering on.
So those are all typical things that you would deal with, but that's the day-to-day, right? The bumps and bruises. Did the Secret Service have anything for you guys as far as your mental state and your mental health?
No. I mean, they were scrambling to figure out what to do. And so when we went through the process to get the invitation to become an agent, you went through the health screening. So at our headquarters in DC, they had those people. And I guess they thought that, hey, let's get those people up, all of them. Let's fly them up to New York or drive them up to New York. No flying. Drive them up to New York, and they'll handle the debrief.
How did you feel about counseling at that point in your life?
Oh, I went through counseling, family counseling. I mean, come on, doesn't everybody?
Yeah,
These
but it's
days?
I know, but at that
no,
point,
back then it was a little different.
Yeah, like-
I mean, you didn't go around to, hey, I went to see
Yeah.
my counselor today, and families go through stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my parents are not immune to that, and so we did family counseling for a little while. My sister and I both, after every session, decided, no, you two need to be in this, not us. And there was a divorce that came, but we were grown adults, my sister and I, when that happened.
When you had that experience of not knowing your body's check engine light was coming on, you're just trying to take a shower after that day.
Mm-hmm.
You had not experienced anything like that.
Never. I'm not claustrophobic. I had my fair share of MRIs being an athlete, so there was nothing like that. And I didn't get on elevators for a while. What I did was really compartmentalize in my head of like what's safe, what's not, and it sounds. Well, it sounds ridiculous because you can't foretell what's going to happen on any given day. I don't have that crystal ball, but you do approach things a little differently.
Moving forward, you start noticing a change in yourself, and people around you start noticing a change. Can you describe that?
Oh man, that wasn't until like way later.
Okay.
I had when I had to get that chest X-ray, and that was the first time that I kind of let myself feel anything, and I remember just breaking down and just hugging Steve, and I'm sure he was like, what the heck, and we just stood there, and he was driving me, and I kind of would just like zone out. I didn't let him see a lot because this was not the Sam. Certainly, he was dating. Like I said, we weren't married yet, and it was that, it's in law enforcement, as first responders, we take on the identity of what we do. Now we know all these, you learn as with age that's part of the stigma. We have to break that, and so that's the work that I'm doing now. But at the time, it was, Sam, you need to like buck up here and just stay in control, do what you know how to do. And, in the debrief that we had, which were split up by squad, and we're sitting in a big circle in a conference room, and there were a lot of us, big field office, and they asked us one question. They were, where were you when the towers came down? I was like, that's a weird question. How about, like, where were you when shit happened? Because I was on West Side Highway when the towers came down. That sounds pretty benign, right? And listening to the stories of my and squad mates and the guys, some of them, breaking down, saying I thought I was going to die. It was tough.
So everybody was pretty open during that?
As open as we were invited to be.
Who was running that? Who kind of ran the debrief?
That was the folks that they brought up from the health from DC.
Okay.
Yeah. And so it ended with, hey, if you ever need anything, we're here. Here's our cards and that kind of thing. And it just, from an outside perspective, even Steve was like, why are they having this at an airport? Because every time a plane would fly over, you would see us instinctively duck, like go to get under something. And,
it's like having somebody been in a shooting. Let's have a meeting at the gun range.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
Yeah, exactly. It makes you scratch your head.
Yeah. So you said it started happening. You started noticing more of a difference, and you started basically your behavior and your coping skills started just going a different direction later on. Can you describe that to the listener?
Yeah, the weeks and the months following, I mean, it was like get up and go to your new not field office on the Upper West Side above a BMW car dealership, and there were news people always around, and our office had no doors.
Nice.
Yes, I said that. The Secret Service office handling electronic crimes and credit cards was there too. We had no doors. Yeah, that was special.
Well,
You have to laugh.
yeah, no, yeah,
We thought we had it bad with waterless toilets here.
yeah. We don't have in the urinals. They have no water. So yeah. What were some of the coping mechanisms you were using back then when you started the weeks and months that went by? I know because I read your book.
Yeah, well, I tried to stay, with the fitness thing, but yeah, drinking.
Mm-hmm. It's really common with the
Yeah.
first responders.
Yeah. Anything to go numb, to not deal with the emotions, to not feel, definitely not watching TV. It was just get through the day, keep your nose down. Again, do what you know how to do what you were trained to do, and everything would be okay. That's what I kept telling myself, and until that started not working. And I had made phone calls back to headquarters, and it was like, yeah, okay, we hear you, we're trying to get back up. And I just am like, whatever.
Yeah, they weren't
No,
hearing you. Yeah.
It was always, well, we have to deal with stuff at the Pentagon. And that was the thing that really made me sit back in my chair and be like, what stuff at the Pentagon? Secret Service doesn't have anything to do with the Pentagon. We don't have an office there. People died there. It was horrible. Yes, some people, maybe there was cross protectees that wanted to go down there, whatever it was. But to use the Pentagon as an excuse when it's like, excuse me, you have no New York field office. The second largest field office in the Secret Service does not exist anymore. And you're talking about the Pentagon.
So how did you get help? Was that something that came about through the Secret Service, or is that something you just made the decision that you didn't want to handle it the way you were handling it anymore?
I didn't get help. I just buried it. I didn't get help for a long time. And I couldn't, it came down to reading the same paragraph of a report that I had to hand in. And I'm like, why can I not comprehend? I went to law school. I wrote briefs. The U.S. attorney used to use me to draft everything. Do you remember floppy disks?
Oh, yeah.
So they had everything on a floppy, and they said, hey, Sam, here is how, just fill in the blanks. Here's the paperwork. And I'm like, I would ask my other squad mates, did anybody give you a floppy? Did you have to do this? And they're like, no. And I was like, it's the law school thing. So I used to draft the documentation, and I was like, whatever. And I couldn't now go through and do my reports that should have been second nature. And it was frustrating. I was pissed, not sleeping. Oof. That was a biggie. And an agent that, I wasn't 100%. An agent that's not 100%, well, stuff can happen. And it's one thing when you're an investigator and that's all you do. It is a whole nother ball game when you are responsible for somebody's life. And I just had to make a decision that I'm not 100% and somebody might get hurt, and I don't want that on my shoulders. I can't have that on my shoulders. It was the survivor's guilt was enough because being trained to save people, and it was like, oh, we should have pulled people out. We should have saved more people, and being reminded, well, the high school student, yeah, I know, but it's always I know, but, and it just got to a point where I needed to not be there. And I made a really difficult decision. It wasn't a decision that I came to lightly. I wasn't functioning as Sam anymore. That drive that I had as an athlete, I'm like, what am I competing with? Me. Because my head was so screwed up. Well, nobody ever gave me the playbook for that. Right? And we're a lot better now.
Yeah, it's a lot better.
But we had nothing. And I say we because nobody wanted to talk about the 2-ton elephant in the room. Every day we came in, we were tasked with tracing the money as it was connected to 9/11, and we walked back by the mug shots. That's what we call them, the mug shots of the terrorists. That's what I saw every single day.
Were you hiding this well with your Steve and your other loved ones?
Oh, easy, because I lived in New Jersey and they did not.
And you're just...
I mean, my mom, my grandparents, Steve knew that there were issues with thunderstorms. Oh man, when there were major storms, that it brought everything back, like watching the towers fall again, and I would be jumping under things. And that was something that I loved as a kid. Meteorology fascinates me. And my parents used to say, get away from the window. You're going to get struck by lightning. What did I know as a kid? You know, I good kid. I listened, but then I'd be like, no, you can't. I read. Yeah. And so my nose would be pressed against the window. And, you know, if it's really loud and intense and you have that huge bolt of lightning and the window would shake, I mean, that was awesome. Oh, no. It was not awesome for a very long time.
Well, you saw the ultimate window shake.
Yeah.
From
and feeling.
Yes.
You feel when it's an intense storm, the thunder and everything. Yep. So that was not good.
What was your breaking point?
Wow. I had separated from the Secret Service. I was now living at home in Maryland with Steve. We got married in January of 2002, and I left my position as an agent in the spring of 2002. So even though we were living apart for all that time, I had a home to come home to, and I was like, oh, great, I'm getting out of the city. I don't have to drive past Ground Zero, the freezer trucks, the whole scene every day anymore. And I thought, this is good. I'm going to be with the guy that I married. I'm going to see my family, my support system, and I'm going to be good. Sam's going to be good. And Sam was anything but good. You know, because your head's attached to your body where everything, is going on. Yeah, there's that minor detail. So things just got really progressively worse. I was drinking every night. Again, anything to numb out. And I was coming up on New Year's, and I was sleeping 10, 12 hours. I would drag myself out of bed, and I did this because I wasn't sleeping. So it would be like I go to sleep, a nightmare would wake me up. I fall asleep again, something else would wake me up. 10 hours though, you know, so you can imagine if you're breaking this up throughout, I don't know, I'm waking up sometimes in the middle of the day, and I drag myself into the bathroom and look in the mirror, and I do not recognize my own reflection staring back at me. That is scary. And right then, I was done. I didn't know who I was. I had lost every semblance of who I was. The strength. I didn't have strength anymore. I couldn't make sense of anything that was going on. And nobody could help me, well, because I didn't let anybody in. And right there, I made the decision, no, I'm not starting a new year the way I just lived this one. I'm out. And so we had some people over for New Year's Eve, wished them Happy New Year. They left. Of course, the alcohol was free flowing as usual. Went up to get some rest, sleep still eluding me. Got out of bed. Steve stayed in bed with our dog. And I went to the kitchen, grabbed the remaining bottles of alcohol, went in my basement, got my gun, sat on the floor. I'm like, this is it. I'm taking myself out. I do not need myself like this. And I was absolutely convinced that nobody needed me in the way that I was. I was useless. And just sat on the floor, took a deep breath, closed my eyes, started squeezing the trigger, and a voice just boomed, like, Sam. And I opened my eyes and I looked around, and as I'm looking, the voice said, it's not your time. Very calm. And I know I'm in the basement by myself. And I know that it is the voice of my higher power who is talking to me. But I am in such a deep, dark place that I do not want to believe that I am literally being spoken to. And so I just drank some more right to the point where I was ready to pass out. Took another deep breath, put my gun in my head, started squeezing that trigger. And my dog jumps into my lap. And he's a 10-pound miniature schnauzer named Solomon. He's not with us anymore. And I'm looking down into his eyes that are just like searing into mine. And it's as if he's saying, I need you. I need you. I passed out, came to a few hours later. Solomon is curled up right next to me. And I know I left that dog curled up in his bed, on our bed, because that's where he was every night, behind a closed door. And it wasn't until I moved to Texas and a wonderful woman, I was doing a book signing in a church, and anybody that knows me well is like, I can't do two things at one time. I've got to focus. So I'm signing books. And she comes and she's talking to me in my ear, and she's saying, well, Sam, you know what about Solomon? And I'm like, yeah, my dog. She says, well, you know what Solomon was? And I was like, my dog. You know, I'm giving her this puzzled look. And she says, no. And I said, excuse me for 1 second, to the person who I'm trying to sign the book for. And I'm looking at her. And she says, what is dog spelled backwards? At this point, I mean, I grew up pretty religious. I mean, we were observant. But after 9/11, I was just like, F you, God. You let 3,000 people fucking die. I'm going through this and I'm asking for answers, and you're giving me nothing. What am I supposed to believe? He always keeps a seat at that table. It's up to us to put our butts in it and pay attention. And when you're drinking to the point that I was drinking and pushing everybody away, you can't even understand or see that the seat is there, right? I had a difficult decision to make at that time. I mean, I was not going to pull the trigger again in front of my dog. I had 3 dogs before. We're now down to 2. I will never be without dogs in my life. But it was tough. I mean, I cleaned everything up, and it made it as if nothing happened. I was like, I'm not going to tell anybody. I'm just going to try and figure out what it's not your time means. And I'm looking at myself. I go in the bathroom, splash water on my face, and I'm looking, and I was like, what is this? And it was, for the next year, a dangerous game of stay present or check out. And I just fought. I fought with everything that I had. I still couldn't figure it out, but whatever that experience was, it at least allowed me to connect with that, call it competitive drive or whatever, that curiosity that I had when I was a kid that made me go into investigations in the first place, right? Just hang on, Sam. Just hang on. That's what I kept telling myself. And I had forgotten a very important lesson that I had learned a long time ago, which was when things are at their worst, when you are literally down on your knees, that's when victory is around the corner. And nobody can give you the timeline, and that's the game. That's why you got to hang on to that hope. And I'm sitting at my breakfast table, and my mom comes over unannounced. She lived 5 minutes from us. And she comes in, she puts a piece of paper in my hand. She says, "We need you back." Now, I had no idea. I was not reaching out, right? It was Sam, the Secret Service agent, Sam Strong, Sam is this, full identity of the job, even though I was separated from the job. People expected me to be that. And she was watching this whole thing, and Steve was talking to her. So, I find this out after therapy where, he's not understanding. He's talking to my mom. And on that piece of paper was the name and a number of a very skilled therapist. And I called the number, and she saved my life through EMDR, the therapy protocol.
Yeah, that we have talked a lot about EMDR on this, and it kind of was discovered in, I believe, 87, and then it started being used in first responders in the mid-90s after the Oklahoma City bombing. And it was initially it was looked at as kind of the voodoo, right? And it wasn't really buy-in. Now it's kind of the go-to for dealing with first responders and military that are suffering from trauma.
Yep, and it's interesting because I grew up, or when Steve and I moved to Texas, our house was just up the road from what became Walter Reed. So I because my dad was in the military, Bethesda Naval, that's where the president went. We shopped there at the Exchange, and so that's where they put the Brain Health Center. And yeah, so it was experimental for the longest time, and now it's not.
All right, Sam, I want to go back to you. You mentioned your mother handed you a piece of paper with a therapist's name on it, and you went and had EMDR therapy. I want you to kind of just tell us about what you knew of it and how your first visit went with that and how that kind of kicked off, and were you receptive to it or what?
Yeah, I had never heard of EMDR. I mean, it was, we're talking about a time before there were smartphones, so it's not like, hey, let me whip out my phone and check this out. My mom had a conversation with her and in her own way explained it to me. And going through family therapy, I was like, okay, it's just, we're going to surf another couch, right? So I made the appointment and I went into it just open because I was so desperate. I needed something. And I remember getting to the office, and people talk about hypervigilance. They talk about startle reflex, lots of buzzwords when it comes to post-traumatic stress. And my startle reflex was high. I talked about the thunderstorms, diving under furniture. So the dumpster trucks, looking for furniture again to dive under. And so I'm sitting in the office, and she calls me in, typical, I'll call it therapist couch. She's in a chair explaining how things are going to work with EMDR. And she's talking about a light bar and some vibrating paddles and headphones. And I'm like, what? It's like, just listen, Sam, just listen. And then somebody slammed the door to the front of her office, and I hit the ceiling. I mean, like a cat, like my claws were in, and I'm on the ceiling, and huge adrenaline rush. So she's seeing this firsthand, and I cannot get myself to slow down. Everything just like a flood just comes out, and it took, I don't even know how long for me to kind of get myself back under control, if you will. Not a comfortable feeling, since I didn't really know this person. But the way that she handled it the way that she helped me ground again and put me back in a somewhat safer place where I could communicate again. And I mean that because I could not talk during this whole episode. And so she knew, I think, if I'm putting words in her mouth, that she had her work cut out for her.
Yeah.
But I was at that point where it was like, just please help me. Help me.
And that's a very unique experience to actually, for the therapist to see what you're trying to tell them. I mean, you didn't have to say another word at that point. I'm sure they were like, okay, I see where you're at now. Because normally it's like going to the garage. As soon as you pull into the garage and tell them what's wrong with your car, you're like, oh, it's making this weird noise, and they always want you to make the noise. And I think it's all just a joke, but you actually got to diagnose your issues right there in front of them. Like, this is what I'm dealing with. And so instead of trying to explain it verbally, it was right there in front of them to see.
Yeah. So thanks to that person, whoever slammed the door.
Yeah, it was fake. Now, did this therapist have a background that you knew of in first responders or in dealing with extreme PTSD?
Yeah, so she had been a trauma therapist for a while. Her background was working with veterans, Vietnam. So I was like, oh, this is intriguing. Every guy in my family served. So she gets veterans. She understands. She started talking about post-traumatic stress. Again, I didn't know that I had it, but everything that she was explaining, I'm checking the boxes. When I'm explaining to her what's going on, she's checking the boxes. And it was when I knew her background. She's also was a registered nurse, so she had some medical training. That it was her heart was in the right place, and I don't think it would have mattered if I was not a first responder. Like I said, the way that she handled my startled response, I was like, and helped. I was like, okay, this person, at least at that moment, you've got my attention because I can focus on what you're saying.
And like with anything, meeting somebody for the first time can be difficult, and especially in this setting. And to have a great first meeting, and you have your own intuition, being in law enforcement and dealing with all the trauma that you faced. Was there some skepticism when going to her? I know you were at a really low point and you needed help. You knew you needed help, but was there a little bit of skepticism when you went to go see her?
I mean, in the back of my mind, a little bit. But I said, unlike a lot of first responders that walk in, like a lot of first responders that walked in, I walked in the office like completely, you're not going to, Sam is Sam, I'm not going to crack. Let's see how this goes.
You're going to test her.
To see if there's going to be a second. And, call it divine intervention, whatever needed to happen. Somebody knew that you're in the right place and you need help. And I'm going to make sure that this person sees that you actually need help. And that's when the door slammed. I will say with my partners that I work with, we hear a lot of stories where the person that you're sitting across from, they need to understand the job. They need to understand trauma, traumatic incidents, the compounded trauma. When you sit when you're sitting across from somebody and said, I've worked 400 murder scenes, you can't have them go, whoa. That's what you don't want to hear. And you don't want to see their eyes get really big because that's a clear sign. Well, I guess I'm in the wrong place next. And what happens if that, statistics show, okay, maybe once is okay. But if it's continuing and you're on your third therapist, fourth, fifth, some of them just pull that lever. It's too much. And so it is really important to find a qualified practitioner, whether they're a family member that grew up in a first responder family and have a lot of that. Talk about vicarious trauma. They get trauma because they've seen it. They've absorbed it. They've dealt with their own stuff. Or whether it's a first responder that's retired and now working as a practitioner because they see the need. They want to help their brothers and sisters. So there is a fine line. It's not just jump to the first couch. And then, if you know somebody that has gotten help, word of mouth, right? That helps too.
Yeah, so you believe being culturally competent is
absolutely
quite important with a first responder. Yeah,
100%.
Well, I've received EMDR therapy, and I believe some other folks, here too as well, has benefited from it. I didn't know anything about it, and one of our ATL counselors, she's former DPD, did 23 years of Dallas PD, 17 in narcotics, and she's a badass. And Dottie Claggett, and she's now a trainer for EMDR, and she's that's her go-to, and she's good at it.
It's amazing stuff.
Yep.
It's to some people it sounds a little out there, especially when they start. It depends because EMDR has evolved.
Yeah.
So much since I'll say way back when, and so some people use a light bar. Some people don't use paddles. Some people use your own tapping. Some people you follow their finger. This must sound weird to people listening. Follows my finger. What?
Well, can you kind of explain that, like what the experience was like, or if you all want to jump in, I mean, go ahead.
Yeah, because it can be different based upon your practitioner. So mine used the light bar. So you follow. I track the light bar with my eyes instead of her holding up her fingers and moving her fingers back and forth and tracking that. There was also an auditory component, which interestingly enough for me, it triggered me. So we were like, okay, we're not using the headphones, so we'll just put those aside. And then the paddles that had a vibration and it went in a particular sequence. And so as soon as we had the recipe for Sam, where Sam could focus, Sam could get into it, I could go to my safe place when I need it, and it just brought out all of this stuff that I had not thought about since I was a kid. And that's the amazing thing is it opens doors that you thought you closed and locked. It's like, why is this coming up? And you work through, whatever it is. And, mine was 9/11, and we just repeated like scenes out of a movie because mine were very segmented, the way that the brain works and all the smells and everything that I took, it just got stored. And when you try to lock it and the door doesn't want to lock, and EMDR opens it, well, you've got to deal with what is in front of you right then before you can move to something else. So we're traditional talk therapy. It's like they'll have a pad, a scratch pad, and so last time we talked about la la la, and then it might bring something up, but then you can go to a different time altogether. That's not how EMDR works. You've got to stay in exactly where your brain just took you and unpackage that.
What were some of the things your mind was going to when you were doing this? I know there's so much from that day in your life, but what really stands out?
So the jumpers. By far, that stayed with me the longest. That was something that took a long time to get me to. You also rate your stress level to really come down and be okay with and not try to put judgment around and not try to put judgment on myself about the situation and then that low grumbling growling sound that I talked about in the very beginning with the towers coming down. I mean, there's still times my triggers are very few and far between, And every once in a while, and I never know, and I'll just be, it's not vivid. It's almost like watching a movie screen that's transparent, so I can see completely through it, and the towers are coming down, and I hear the sound, but I don't have that visceral body response, that stress response where, sweating, my heart's racing. I don't have that anymore. It's just like, this is interesting. I take note. I'm aware of it. I take a step back. I detach from it. And because of that awareness piece, I just kind of scan my environment and be like, well, what was that?
I love how Kent, you break down EMDR and kind of give your explanation. I love how you do it. Can you go ahead and...
So it was really weird for me. I kind of went into the whole thing a little apprehensive. I didn't know that it was exactly what I needed or how I wanted to do it. And Dottie Claggett was just like, I think we should try this. And I was like, well, you're the boss. I I don't do this for a living. That's your job. So she basically had just a little wand that she waved in front of my face and said, just follow it with just your eyes. We all learned the horizontal nystagmus. I can't even remember all the words anymore. But basically just follow it with your eyes and don't move your head. And so I did that a few times. And as I'm doing that, she's like, focus on whatever it is that bothers you. And so I'm trying to replay the events in my mind, and I'm trying to follow that. And I'm kind of a weird person. I have to count. Like, it doesn't matter if I'm running or if I'm working out. I'm constantly counting reps or steps or whatever. So as she's going back and forth, I'm like 1, 2, 3, 4. And I had a hard time focusing on what I was trying to focus on already. But as it keeps going, it's like it almost just got fuzzy. The entire image of what was going on was getting fuzzy, and it was hard for me to pay attention to it. And then we took a break, and she was like, let's try that again. But this time I want you to even focus even more. And she said, I want you to tap. And so I'm tapping on my own legs. And as I'm tapping, again, I'm counting because I'm weird. And I'm trying to focus on that image, and it's getting more blurry and more blurry. And it was so vivid before, and it was something that I've dealt with for 17 years at that point. Of every day I relive this moment, worst day of my life. Tied in with one of the best days of my life. It was a really awkward situation that we'll get into in a later episode probably. But
we have to now.
Yeah, you open that can.
But watching it and trying to focus on it, and then it just gets blurry. And then the next day I wake up and I realized towards the end of the day, like, I haven't thought about it. And to this day now, I don't think about it until I'm ready to discuss it with people. So when we talk about traumatic events, that's my go-to, right? Like, here's my story. But it's not something that haunts me anymore. It's not in the forefront of my mind. It's actually filed in the back of my mind now, where it was supposed to be the entire time. But having gone through it and living with the fear of what was going to happen, all the other things that you go through when you're involved in anything on duty is it's tough to process what you actually went through. And I think the EMDR actually helped me process that. So watching it go from being ultra vivid every day to still fuzzy if I even try to recall it now, it's really weird. I like to think that it's a little bit of voodoo, but I'm here for it. So
yeah, since you talked about the jumpers and and I read your book, the rumbling and a growling sound, that the twisting metal and the burned concrete and everything.
Yeah, that smell.
Yeah. I've tried to imagine how that sounds, and it's just I can't imagine how loud that must have been, and already one of the busiest cities in the country.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things about the brain work. So, you guys know that the fight or flight, and then came freeze many years later. That when all of this stuff was coming at me, it must have been so loud, but my brain was protecting me, and it was like somebody took the volume button and just went, nope. And so I just moved and did the motions with no sound, even though I know it was utter chaos. It's kind of interesting. and then to have the post, when you're supposed to be in your safe place, mine was my apartment and then eventually my home, and then relive all of this in that vivid high def with the sounds. That's kind of like woohoo, the mind-blowing.
The brain is ultra powerful. It's really scary when you realize what your own brain can actually do.
Yeah. And it's actually a big relief knowing that as well, what the brain can do.
And what you can basically train your own brain to.
Yep.
It's adaptive.
It's plastic.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yeah. Very. What kind of support were you getting from home whenever you were going through this? And did you, after the first session and the first, experience, how did that look when you went home as far as you were laughing?
A bottle of.
Okay.
I mean, let's face it. I just went through this massive adrenaline dump, startle reflex. I don't know whether to go for a run, to go to sleep, so I was like, let's just drink. It is, everything got stirred up, right? So I did my best for the longest period of time that I could to kind of keep everything at a manageable level, because I needed that control. In law enforcement, we need control. Okay. I tell people all the time the Secret Service takes control to the umpteenth degree, because we're trying to even control Mother Nature if we can, right? And so any ounce of that I could get is what I grasp onto. And now, the boiling pot, the lid just got taken off, and it was nuts. And God bless my husband. We've been married for 21 years. And I often have to stop myself and put myself in his shoes of what it must have been like to live with me, because you don't ask, well, how's your therapy appointment, dear? Without having, knives thrown at your face. It's,
Poor husband.
Yeah. So he didn't know what to say. I mean, he comforted me in his own way. Like, sometimes it was just sitting on the couch with me and just putting his arm around me or just giving me a hug. But people that are listening to this that have been through trauma, sometimes your body is in a state of alertness and awareness, and where it's like, hey, don't effing touch me. So he wouldn't understand when I would push him away, because all he wanted to do is give me support. And I think that's a big component that's gotten better over the years. There was no, let's bring the spouse or the family in to help them understand why Sam's a God blessed mess and what this is going to look like. And, because it's hard to explain what's going on when you're in it, because if you talk about it, you just got out of something that was crazy. And there were a couple of times, she did not push meds. Meds have their place. If you need it, great. If you don't, great. Where I needed something because things went so far sideways. There was so much to work on that I couldn't come down, and luckily I only had to take that stuff, 3 times.
Yeah.
Woof. But yeah, that's like, hi honey, bye honey, clunk into the bed, and don't bother me for a bunch of hours.
And one of the news buzzwords, right, is the love language. So figuring out how people display their affection, how they receive affection, is really big when you're dealing with somebody who's been through some trauma, because if they don't want to be touched, like if they don't want to talk, there's all sorts of things that people do, and how they receive affection, how they give affection. Right. If you're off and that's not your thing, then that's going to be really bad. And
I think a huge piece of that that's very confusing is, if you did the love language thing, before you got married or before the trauma, and it was one way, and then after the trauma, it's a 180. You're like, where'd my spouse go?
Yes.
And so kudos, make sure that practitioners that you're seeing, they have to include the family. And I'm even a huge fan of kind of like a side-by-side, not sitting side-by-side in the office, so to speak, but while the first responder is going through therapy, the spouse and the family have their own homework to do at the same time. So there's a meeting of the minds as much as there can be.
Well, at least educate them on what could happen and what has happened to their spouse or partner that has experienced this level of trauma. Because a lot of people, they don't, some people, the most stressful part of the day might be getting cut off on the way to work and getting shot the finger or something, so to go through something like that, it's hard for a lot of people to understand. And then as a first responder spouse, you don't go home and entirely dump on them. I know I never did, and told the entire story. You minimize it, and or just don't say anything at all. And they just don't know until you start falling apart right in front of them.
Right, and that's the message now with the Badge of Honor, and what we're working with is, yes, we focus on first responders, but we have a whole program dedicated to the family. So we have the first responders and their family in their workshop at the same time, because there's got to be that understanding. There's got to be the language of trauma, the language of healing, and everybody's got to be on the same page. If you have little kids, it's important for them to understand when you say, I can't play with you right now, the reason behind that. Because kids are just going to be like, why is mom being such a big bee, right? Why does mom never want to play? And it's not that mom doesn't want to play. Mom's head might be in a space where it's just not advisable, or I just feel drained.
Mom's trying to
exhausted.
survive. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we interviewed Shelby Houston, and her father was a Mesquite police officer who was killed in the line of duty. And she threw out that she's trying to get all of these police officers to go to therapy and saying, if it's not for you, then do it for your kids. And when you put it that way, and you think about the fact that all of your trauma you take home and you try to keep it away from your family, but you're impacting your family, and so they're all feeling it also. So really, this is kind of a shout out to anybody who wants to fix themselves and is trying to keep everything away from their family. Like, just go talk to somebody about it, and you'll be surprised at how much number one, you weren't keeping it from your family. You were affecting everybody else around you. It's just a huge benefit to actually go and get it taken care of before it eats you up. And
Right.
I mean, I held it for 17 years. My kids weren't even born yet, and I'd already changed the way I was acting around people.
Yeah, and frankly, with social media and the way things are now, you're really not hiding anything from them. I mean, you don't have to give the gruesome facts, but they're gonna know.
Right.
So why let somebody else them read a post from somebody else? You tell them.
Or watch the video somebody posted
Yeah.
of it. Yeah.
Even worse.
So your husband played a huge role in once he found out, like, okay, this is going to work, and this is the boundaries and space I need to give her while you basically had to, your therapist gave you all these tools, and you had to work on them, and it's a lot of work. People understand it's a lot of work to refine the tools that you're given. How did that look for you, as far as, like, you go through the EMDR and it opens a can of worms, and you're, it basically you're exposed to all the trauma all over again. You're
Right.
victimized by everything. Now it's all out on the table. You have to figure out how to put it all back in its own little Tupperware and place it in the storage. So what kind of time frame and how much work did you have to do to get to that point? I mean, you're doing phenomenal, right?
Yeah. Thanks.
But
it's been a minute.
yeah. But
Yeah.
how did that look?
I mean, it was a year-long process. Like I said, the EMDR has changed over the years. So from what we're seeing and hearing now, and people sharing their stories, that the time frames are much more compressed. EMDR has gotten so good, and the practitioners that are devoted to this. They've gotten so good that, you're not with a practitioner for a year. And so mine was, it just was. And I got to a point where I could see clearly again, and started talking about, well, what do we want to do after we're done with this? And it was, hey, I want to go back into law enforcement. I want to do what I know how to do best, what I was trained to do, what I was put on this planet to do, to serve and protect. And once you get to a point where you have that goal every day, is the game. In mental health, you're receiving solutions from the outside, but it's not the outside solutions that are going to save you. It's what you do with what you've been given every single day. And the first thing is open your eyes and get the heck out of bed. You got to put your foot down on the floor, realize where you are, whether you've just woken up from a nightmare or gotten a great sleep. And then you've got to plan your day and utilize the tools that you've been given where it fits. So if I'm not triggered all day, yeah, big check mark, gold star, but life is life, right? So I could have a trigger an hour after I wake up, but now I have a tool to combat that trigger, because it's post-traumatic stress, right? So you're combating that stress response, and then I can go on with my day. Not being outside for a long time, that was a big thing in my treatment that I needed to get back to, because I played sports my whole life. I was one of the kids where you get home from school and it's like, okay, dinner is at this time, I'll yell for you. I was not inside. And here I am, I'm like, I can't even go outside of my house because a trash truck might be emptying trash, right? And so once I planned my day where I was like, today we're walking the dog. We're just going around the block, we're walking the dog. Because if I am triggered by something, I have a tool. The trigger isn't going to pull me around and whip me into a frenzy like it did before. How do I know this? Because we did it in her office. We practiced. And in law enforcement, as a first responder, you practice like you play, right? It's the same thing. Make therapy your new training. It all fits. It's all logical in the grand scheme of things. It's just a different kind of training that you have to learn. And that's what I did. And step by step, day to day. And sure, I tripped and fell a bunch of times, but I never fell down into that hole and, thought about suicide again. I mean, it flashes here and there like, oh God, it's one of those days. Do I really want to be here? How many of those days? But boom, you break the cycle. You're aware of those voices like, Sam, hello. These are not the ones you want to listen to.
Yeah, you didn't find yourself back in that basement.
No.
It sounds like intentionality at its finest. Mm-hmm. You have to get up every day and be intentional in your process. Whatever process worked before didn't stop working because of the trauma that you were exposed to. So you had to build your own step by step, be intentional, and plan your day and what's going to get you through that day. Take it day by day.
Absolutely. And sometimes it was just hour by hour, and it's not, what I want people to understand is it's not taking big steps. Like, oh, I did EMDR, I did this kind of therapy, I should be fine. That's not how it works. You are your own chocolate chip cookie recipe. That's why I tell people, it's like some people like nuts in theirs. I'm a purist. Just give me but I do like dark chocolate. So mix in some dark chocolate chips. That you need to create your success recipe. And when you're in a place in your mental health journey where you can't even think about looking at a recipe or cracking eggs or whatever, if you can't even envision or you feel like taking the first step, you should be seeing somebody for sure. I mean, it should have happened already. But that if you're numbing out, if you don't want to feel, if you don't want to share, don't want to talk, you're giving the middle finger to the world. And it's with everything. Somebody cuts you off. The computer's operating too slowly. Somebody did something on your favorite sports team. You know.
Yeah, we see a lot of that in negativity in this profession. We see it every day, yeah. and it consumes you, and it could basically, you can become that person, and as you become that person, nobody else wants to be around that person. And you can isolate. I mean, you push everybody away and isolate yourself.
Well, it's easy because they don't understand.
Yeah.
So that's when you just draw. Fine, they don't understand. Move on. And yeah, you do. You push everybody away, and that's exactly what I did. Yep. But it's the difficulties and the missteps and the trips and the falls and the scraped knees and everything. It's worth it. It's so worth it. Because I never thought in a million years I'd be doing what I'm doing now with 3 incredible partners in the nonprofit. And a badge of honor is, we're saving lives. That's what it's about, using the crap that we've been through. And we still go, for therapy. We're not, it's just because you went through your trauma and you had EMDR once, it doesn't mean the rest of your life is going to be all, unicorns and rainbows.
Yeah, well, it's maintenance. It's like your car needs maintenance. I mean, your body needs maintenance too, and your mind needs maintenance. And just to kind of get a perspective of, you're doing way better than you were. Mm-hmm. But you go talk to somebody, they may see something from the outside looking, and you don't see within yourself. Just to kind of point it out, and you're like, damn, you walk out of there, go, I didn't even realize that. Yeah,
your awareness piece is, you can only be aware of something as you've been trained in it. Like, I was never trained as a narcotics officer. I would need to go through a whole class and, how to be undercover and the whole thing. And so you go to class, you train, you learn, and then you take the steps. And then, narcotics officer. Well, it's not a SWAT officer. Well, if I want to be SWAT, I got to go through training and you got to take the steps. And so if you look at therapy and you look at rebuilding your mental health, like anything you've ever done in life, it doesn't look like this big giant hurdle that you cannot conquer. Now, that's not to discount, major chemical imbalances that people can find themselves in. That's why I said medication has its place. And yes, there are people that fall into that negativity and their whole brain gets rewired for that. And they have a very difficult time coming out of that. That's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah. That's part 2 with you. We'll come back in. We'll get Tanya Glenn or Dr. T in, come in and talk about that.
Yep.
I want to talk about Badge of Honor. You've mentioned your nonprofit that you're working in, and I want you to tell the listener how you started that and what it is and what your mission is and what you're up to.
Yeah, so after I decided to, move on from law enforcement, which was in 2012, and moved to Texas in 2013, I was at the management level. I wasn't doing I'll call it the fun stuff on the street. Still rewarding what I was doing, but I knew I wasn't going to find what I needed, right? The next steps, staying where I was. So when I moved on, I immersed myself in just a giant learning journey. And my husband's been in the health and wellness field for years. Part of being in law enforcement, you got to stay fit. And I started a side business that kind of evolved into its own thing. And it put me in front of leaders that talked about growth journey and really tapped into a creative side that I just kind of never thought I had. As an athlete, I was like, what's art? It was, and it opened my eyes to a side of, hey, what about using what you've been through to help people? And I'd just be like, well, what do you mean by that? Why would I want to rehash? So it was kind of a stepping back, because I already did the rehash on the couch that one, and it was kind of hard. So there was a little trepidation. Why would I want to put myself out there? And I had to learn that it's as you live in the vulnerability of being out there, telling your story, no matter how tough and how bad it was, that's what people need to help them, because you never know when your story is going to save somebody else's life. And fast forward a bunch of years, it's coming up on September 11th. A friend of a friend said, hey, you need to have this girl, Sam, from Rowlett on your radio show. And it was called Mad Radio, Making a Difference. And the guy that reached out, he had a very unique email address with 4 numbers. And I said, oh, by any chance, is this your badge number? And he said, busted. So he's a retired NYPD detective, and he also served as his fire chief in his hometown. So you can do that in New York. So he's from the island. So he's a fire chief on the island. He's a full-time NYPD detective. And he worked undercover in the 5 families. Maybe he'll be on. I don't know. I'll get you hooked up with John. Yeah, he's got incredible stories. And after sharing that on his show, and by that time I had written the book, and that's why I said the creative side. I met so many people that helped me cultivate that I could sit down and write a book. Had a great editor, and we talked about 9/11. We talked about why it's important to remember. We talked about the 412 first responders that we lost that day, and we continue to lose from 9/11 cancers. And I had been approached while I was going through this journey. Hey, Sam, we need to do something together. Let's work together. Oh, great. What does that look like? And every single time it fell through. Like I couldn't get the person back on the phone, or they had some trauma that came up and they disappeared. So I was like, what am I going to do here? And John was like, we need to do something together. And I was like, oh God, I'm hearing those words again, right? Mm-hmm. I'm like, I just turned to him and I said, you're not going to disappear on me. And he looked at me like I had a third eye. He's like, well, no, what are you talking about? Like, you had to move to Texas. I had to move to Texas. We found each other in Texas. We both were in New York on 9/11 at the pile. We never met each other till we moved to Texas. And I've met so many 9/11 first responders in Texas. And 2019, we started a badge of honor. And I was working with a company that was helping me with promotion on my side. Just hit like, hey, Sam, let's get your story out there. Let's get the book, that promo. But John and I we had so much in common other than 9/11 and the stories and the trauma and still the stuff that we dealt with. And we're like, well, why don't we start this thing, and it's you and me, and we'll go talk to first responders. So at first looked like, kind of like a peer support kind of thing. We'll just get together and, shoot the shit or whatever it looked like. And then we made some PowerPoint slides and, kind of got formal. And I happened to be asked to go present up at Collin County for a first responders program. And it was there that I met Jeff Freeman, who's a Rowlett police officer, current Rowlett police officer. And he shared his story, and I'm just like blown away. And I called John and I said, hey, John, I think I just found another team member for a badge of honor. So we talked to Jeff, and Jeff was in the same boat. He was like, who wants to hear all this, stuff? And, the way that Jeff tells his story, I mean, he's like a comedian and a serious person, and it's all wrapped into one, and you will laugh because it's just the way he makes fun of himself. And but people connect with it. When he presents to this day, I'm on the edge of my seat because Jeff just lets it fly, tells it like it is. And so there was the three of us, and we were going around and we were talking to first responder groups, and lo and behold, John's like, we need to make this a nonprofit. And I said, well, did you just make it? What do you do? I don't know.
I feel like I have to sign something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Lots of paper. And is the government involved?
Yeah.
What do I, and so, John reached out. It's the power of networking, power of connection, being open again, learning something new. And we met with a woman who walked us through the entire process. And she's like, oh, you guys are doing this. Do you see yourself, making more than $50,000 in 3 years? And I was like, well, I hope so. But what are the realities of what our program does? She walked us through it. Fast forward to 2021 in the midst of the pandemic. Okay. So we haven't gotten our status yet. We're still waiting on it, but we're still doing the programs because and I want to say a huge thank you to all of the departments that said yes. Because the pandemic brought in a whole new level of stress for their departments across the board. And with that, the need to talk about mental health. Let's talk about the tools, because we don't leave people in the trauma. You're walking out of our workshops, which are 8 hours long now, with tactics and tools. So when the stress comes up, you know exactly what to do. And we realized right before we got our status, I was like, we need a practitioner. And so kind of looked around who was doing what. And I had remembered back to that Collin County deal. And I was like, wait, there was this guy. Oh my God, I have to find him. Mm-hmm. And John Edmondson from Healing Springs Ranch up in Tioga, he has an incredible background. His trauma, from when he was a little kid, it's heartbreaking to hear what he went through as a young person, and it's incredible to hear what he did with it and the impact that he's making. And he is such a gifted person, and just an outstanding creative mind. It takes up for all of us his creativity, and he became part of the team. I mean, it was like a 1 second ask. He's like, yes. And he said, well, what does it look like? Because obviously he's got a full client load at the ranch and everything that he does. And it just works. And so we got certified by the state of Texas, and so we can offer TCOL credits to the first responders that come through. And like I said, it's 8 hours, and it's work. Mm-hmm. It's work because this is not death by PowerPoint. This is not a 2-day conference. This is not a notebook full of stuff that you have to say, wait, what'd they say? And you have to go flip back through pages. We want to our whole goal was to make it just like we trained. You do the skill in repetition so that there's no thought process. And so we call it building your wellness and resiliency toolbox. And sure, we give you paper, and people bring notebooks and stuff, but it's like keywords, buzzwords, words that stand out to you, words that you're not going to forget. We talk about what your why is and why it's important to write that out. And you got it on your fridge, on your mirror, at your desk, in your car, and how that can literally save your life. And so we're not leaving. There's so many programs I've participated in, whether it be on Zoom, because like I said, the pandemic changed a lot, whether it be on Zoom or in person, where you're going, okay, now what? This was great information, but now what? And we don't do that. And so, if you like being immersed, in an 8 hour, it's 8 hours interactive workshop. It's back and forth. We've got, sheets of paper. We ask you to rate stuff. We talk. We do group in the afternoon where we all get to in a circle. But, John does a form of group EMDR. It's not full, because it's not appropriate in that setting. But that's why I said EMDR has come such a long way. And we talk about therapy, and we talk about what that looks like. And the last slide of the day is our slide of all of the partners and the resources that we have cultivated with over the years. And we put that up, and it's also included in their little toolbox. They actually get a little physical toolbox. There's you're never alone. When you think you're alone, open that toolbox and look at all of these resources. Go to our website, click on a logo. You're on the homepage. And whether you want to get well by being outdoors, or you want to try this thing called EMDR, we got you. And it's all about offering a hand out to help somebody get up.
Hey, Sam, could you, for the listener, can you tell us your mission statement on your, do you have a mission statement? I'm sure you do.
Yeah, so our mission is to provide post-traumatic stress awareness and suicide prevention for first responders. That's in a nutshell.
And where would the listener, if you're a listener or organization that want to get involved and get their own toolbox, what's the website?
It's real simple, abadgeofhonor.com.
Yeah, I don't even have to write that down. So this is growing, evolving. This is you made it past the pandemic, and there's a new layer of trauma for everybody because of that. We're still reeling and still healing from that. What is next? What is your next mission to keep? I know you're going to get this growing, but give us a peek in the future for you.
Yeah, it already has grown since, we're not sitting 6 feet apart from each other anymore. So we're back up full force in the departments. So full classes. We also started, we've got that family wellness and resiliency as well. And we started a new initiative called Walk the Bridge. And this is something that started in 2018 over in my neck of the woods and on the bridge that connects, depending on where you are, Rowlett to Rockwall or Rockwall to Rowlett, depending on which direction you're driving. And it was on the 22nd of every month, and it was really to highlight and make people aware of the suicide epidemic plaguing our veterans. And we brought in first responders after that because the number was never 22, which it took a bunch of years to find out that it was never 22. But that number, a lot of mission statements, a lot of nonprofits use that number so people connect with it. And it took on its own thing. God bless Senator Hall. He took the recommendation to change the bridge, the 66 bridge, and it's now called Heroes Memorial Bridge. And so we brought people out to rededicate the bridge, and it is a hero's bridge because it is a hero's walk. And we don't like, as first responders, we don't like to be called heroes. It's like, just doing our job, right? But to the average or to the citizen, that's what we are. And so you got to be comfortable with that term. And once we got the public involved and be like, this isn't just an initiative where those of us that have served get out there and, offer peer support to each other. We're moving. We're literally taking steps forward to healing. This is a chance to include families that have lost loved ones, whether it be from mental health and they're not service related, or they've lost a spouse in the line of duty or to suicide. And what we like to say is we want people to come out to remember their loved ones the way they lived, not in the manner that they died. And it is, it continues to grow. It's now worldwide. We just launched a third Walk the Bridge in the UK. And, that's kind of a big country as well. And, so we are nationwide. And if you go to walkthebridge.org, you can see all of the locations. You can also start your own. If it's something that you go onto the website and you like what you see, reach out to us and start it in your community, because mental health affects everybody and we can all heal together. And I think the more that we understand a lot of what the public goes through, the non-uniform folks, and vice versa, that is where you bridge a lot of, as your podcast says, the divide that has only grown bigger over these last few years, and we're looking to, come together.
That was a big player in the selecting the name for this thing too. So, yeah. And that bridge, I actually have to go over that, as you do too, later on today. I had to go pick up my daughter, that bridge, and I drove over it on Memorial Day, and all the flags are up, and I always see people walking across the 66 bridge carrying flags or carrying their pack. I mean, it's really, it's beautiful.
Yeah, so we are out the third Sunday of every month. So, like I said, go to the website, see if it's in your area, and come and join us. We want to stop adding pictures to that bridge wall.
Sam, I got a question. What is the first piece of advice that you would give a responder or just a citizen that's going through their own 9/11 or July 7th event? What the first piece of advice that you would tell them? Talk to your spouse, talk to your friend, talk to a family member, talk to your freaking dog. Talk. Do not keep it inside. Don't go silent.
Could boil over, right? You just bottle it up. You can't release it. I want you to. You got a lot of stuff going on, and you have a lot of things planned. I want you to tell listeners about your podcast.
Yeah, we have a podcast, again, real easy to remember, A Badge of Honor podcast. And it's weekly. We do it live, actually, so it's a little bit different. So we bring guests on that are all about healing and our first responders, even technology, like people developing apps, anything that a first responder can use, because it's about giving first responders and family members tools, not just go to therapy. Therapy's great, but some people are not there. They just they're feeling overwhelmed. They're feeling really stressed out. Okay. But they're not necessarily like, I don't feel the need for EMDR. Like I don't feel broken. Right. But I do need some new outlet, or I need to do something. Tools. So we bring them on, and it runs live on YouTube, LinkedIn Live, and Twitter Live. That's every Monday at 5 p.m. Central. And then we have an incredible company that manages us. Shout out to OBBM Media Network over in Farmers Branch. And what they do is they take our stuff and they strip out audio and put it on all the podcast apps, so you can listen on your favorite podcast app when you're running or walking or wherever. And then we started a Rumble TV channel because stuff is the way it is, and Rumble is growing, and Rumble won't cancel us because sometimes, hey, we don't pull punches. We're real. We say what needs to be said, and sometimes YouTube doesn't like that. So
Yeah,
That's why Joe wants to start an OnlyFans, but I
Yeah.
kept telling him
Yeah.
we can't do that on OnlyFans.
I actually did start. No, I'm just kidding. So we'll talk offline about that one. I like what you've mentioned several times about people telling their stories and the value in it, and even your reluctance to talk about it. Why the hell would I want to talk about this again? I mean, I'm not to re-traumatize, myself, but I believe there's such value in other people hearing it and hearing the down moments and hearing the resiliency creep out, and you build on it and you get tools and you apply those tools, and then you become the person that you are now. It's a success story, 101 workshop. And that's why starting this up, it was actually in Dr. T's 3-day seminar. That's what gave me the idea for this, is listening to people tell their stories of falling on their face, but picking themselves back up, and reading the room and seeing the reaction. And that's the same thing you're used to seeing when you're out talking to hundreds of people.
it gives people hope. It lets them know you're not broken. Things may not be going really well right now, or maybe the wheels all fell off. But there's a lot of stories out there where the wheels are off, the chassis is gone, the frame is bent. You do what you need to do. You dig in deep. Do not give up. And you will come back. And I like to think that, we come back stronger in the end. And everybody's journey is their own. There's no comparison, just like with trauma. Trauma is trauma. There is no comparison with that. And I think the more that people embrace the understanding that, hey, if you're going to raise your right hand and you're going to take that oath, you need to understand what that job is going to bring to you, so that you can start in the very beginning on building that resiliency and your wellness component. And you've got to stick with it. The more resilient you are, the better. And we're huge fans of getting programs in at the ground floor. And some departments are doing that. Because you got to know. You don't, it's, as we sit here doing this podcast, we're not in the blindsiding business anymore. We're not in the suck it up business anymore. Those times have passed. And if you're in a department where you still have people saying suck it up and move on, look somewhere else. Because it is not worth your mental health.
I had a final question, but damn, I think you had a mic drop with that. I think that's a perfect way to wrap it up. Wow. I'd like to get you back on as a guest co-host later on for other episodes if you're up for it.
Absolutely.
Especially you living so close. Thank you for being you. Thank you for spreading this much needed conversation. You did your service, and now you're doing an even bigger service for so many others, and the first responders and the communities they serve. Thank you, Sam.
Well, you're very welcome, and I appreciate what you all are doing, putting this out there, because your stories, our stories, do save lives. So thank you.
Hey brother, hey sister, I'll never give up on you. Hey Mrs., hey mister, I'll see this all the way through. No matter how far the sun and the moon, I'll never give up on you. Down when you're lonely, and I'll pull you up. Clock leaves you heavy when the going gets tough. I'll be your shoulder, together we'll run. Up from the bottom, yeah, we'll rise above. Hey brother, hey sister, I'll never give up on you. never give up on you. Hey Mrs., hey mister, I'll see this all the way through. No matter how far, for the gold and the blue, I'll never give up on